The night the river swallowed our town, my own father released me into the raging waters while shouting, "Your sister needs me more." For 30 years, he lived as a hero while I struggled to remember who had tried to kill me. Good morning, my dear friends. Or is it afternoon? Evening? Whatever time you're watching this, I want you to feel the warm embrace of this grandma right here. I'm Olivia Wright, 73 years young, born in Riverview in the Ohio River Valley, but today I live here in Pine Ridge, North Dakota, where I found my peace after so much turbulence in life. These days, I spend my mornings making cloth dolls for underprivileged children. They aren't ordinary dolls. Each one has a special meaning. I make them using fabric scraps from clothes that marked my life. There's a doll made from the dress I wore when I reunited with my sister, another from the first clothing I received after the flood, and even one with fabric that remained from my old home. I usually embroider a bright red heart on each one's chest, to remember that even in the worst moments, the heart keeps beating. I started this craft about 15 years ago, when I finally understood I needed to transform my painful memories into something beautiful. At first, they were just awkward little figures, but with time I learned new techniques. The children in the area began calling my creations rescue dolls. They say they chase away nightmares. Who knows if that's true? After all, they chased away mine. I'm sitting here in my sewing room with baskets of colorful fabric scraps around me and my mother-in-law's old sewing machine in front of me. Through the wide windows, you can see the sunset painting the sky orange and purple, while the swallows return to their nests. It's a simple place, but for someone who once lost everything in life, every scrap of fabric has a value that can't be measured. Before continuing my story, I'd like to ask a little favor from my heart. If this story touches you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This helps this grandma reach more people who might need to hear what I have to share. And tell me in the comments, which part of the United States are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the night silence? I always read all the comments and get emotional knowing where your kindness comes from. Let's create a chain of strength and hope. Today I'll tell a story I've kept in my heart for many years. A story about how waters can wash away not just our homes, but who we are. And about how sometimes we need to be carried away by the current to discover our true strength. I was born in a simple house in Riverview, in the Ohio River Valley, back in 1952. In those days, the Ohio River was our gentle neighbor that flowed below, about 600 feet from our house. Daddy, Arnold Wright, worked at the sawmill and always came home smelling of freshly cut wood. He was a tall man of few words, with ice-blue eyes that always seemed to be seeing beyond what others could see. He took pride in his German surname, although his mother was as American as apple pie. Mom, Dorothy, was the opposite, petite, talkative, with a laugh that filled the house. She sewed for others, and everyone in Riverview knew the delicate embroidery that came from those skilled hands. She taught me my first stitches, holding my small hands over the embroidery hoop. "Olivia," she would say, "each stitch is like a day in life. If you do it carefully, in the end, you'll have a beautiful design." Our house was simple but cozy. 3 bedrooms, living room and kitchen, with a yard that sloped down toward the river. The walls were wooden, creaking on cold winter nights as if the house was talking to us. The floorboards were pine that Mom waxed every week until they shone. The wood stove stayed lit all day in winter, and it was around it that the family gathered after dinner. We were 3 children, me, the middle child, George, my older brother, 2 years older than me, and my younger sister Linda, 4 years younger. George was Daddy's favorite, strong like him, always ready to help at the sawmill, knew the name of every wood just by smell. He already had all his plans laid out. He'd inherit his father's trade, marry the store owner's daughter, build a big house. Linda was different. She was born fragile, with health that seemed like a crystal glass, any stronger breeze, and she was in bed with a fever. Mom lived her life around her, running with syrups, teas, compresses. The town doctor, Dr. Thompson, practically lived at our house. "That girl won't make it," the neighbors whispered, but Mom wouldn't accept this fate for her little one. And me? I was the middle child, neither strong like George nor fragile like Linda. I was the one Daddy barely noticed, the one Mom called when she needed help with the little one. I lived in my own world, playing by the riverside, talking to the cloth dolls Mom made. At school, I was quiet, but learned quickly. Teacher Mrs. Wilson said I had a good head for numbers, but in those days, girls studying beyond elementary school was almost a waste, according to Daddy. Our routine was simple. We'd wake up with the rooster crowing before sunrise. Mom was already up, lighting the stove, preparing coffee, while Daddy got ready for the sawmill. I helped dress Linda and tidied the kitchen. Then we'd go to school, George and I on foot, playing in puddles along the way. When we returned, lunch was on the table. In the afternoon, I helped Mom with the sewing or looked after Linda while she attended to her clients. Games were outdoors. Jacks, hopscotch, jump rope, hide and seek with the neighborhood children. My favorite spot was under the big oak in the yard, where I built doll houses with old crates. My best friend was Irene, the baker's daughter, who always brought a piece of sweetbread hidden in her uniform pocket. On Sundays, we went to the Baptist church in the morning, all dressed in our best clothes. Afterward, it was a day for a special lunch, chicken soup with cornbread or barbecue when it was a celebration day. In the afternoon, sometimes Daddy would take us fishing in the river. Those were the only times I saw him truly smile. Riverview, in the 50s, was a small town where everyone knew each other. The cobblestone streets, the colorful houses in the American style, the central square with the bandstand where the band played on Sundays. The economy revolved around timber, leather, and agriculture. Nothing happened that everyone didn't know about the same day. But the river, the Ohio River had two faces. For most of the year, it was Gentle, our playmate, where we fished for small fish and bathed on hot days. But when heavy rains came, it transformed. Mom would look worriedly through the window, measuring with her eyes the distance between the water and our house. "The river's restless today," she would say, as if talking about a temperamental person. And we knew what that meant. Keep watch, prepare important things in plastic bags, sleep dressed just in case. It was on one of those stormy nights when I was 11 that I saw for the first time that look on my father's face. A look that years later I would recognize as the harbinger of something that would change our family forever. He was on the porch, watching the rain fall like sharp needles, the river rising faster than usual. George at his side, Linda in Mom's arms, me leaning against the doorframe. "If the water comes, we can only take the essentials," he said, not looking at any of us. "Understand?" That night, the water didn't reach our house, but something changed inside my father. He began building a kind of attic, a higher place inside the house. "For the difficult days," he said. What we didn't know was that the truly difficult days were just beginning. The warning of that flood when I was 11 was just a preview of what would come later. Life followed its course for a few more years, with seasons passing like the waters of the Ohio, sometimes gentle, sometimes turbulent. I grew taller and developed the first contours of a young woman. When I turned 13, Mom gave me a music box with a ballerina that spun to the sound of Für Elise. It was the most precious object I had ever owned. It was around this time that I began to notice changes in my father's behavior. It wasn't just his preference for George. That had always existed. It was a constant nervousness, a gaze that wandered to the horizon during meals, as if expecting something terrible to appear at any moment. Sometimes, late at night, I heard him hammering in the attic he had built. Mom told me not to worry, that it was just his way of preparing for whatever might happen. "Your father carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, Olivia," she explained while we embroidered together. "He feels responsible for all of us. It's his way of showing he cares." But I wasn't so sure, especially after that afternoon when I accidentally overheard a conversation between him and Irene's father, Mr. Benjamin. "The river will claim its price one day, Arnold," said Mr. Benjamin, his voice low but filled with concern. "You live too close. Have you thought about moving?" "And go where? With what money?" Dad answered harshly. "Besides, the sawmill is nearby. And Linda, you know how she is. A move could be the end of her. If the flood comes strong, Arnold, it will be the end of all of you." That conversation hammered in my head for days. I began to observe the river with different eyes, no longer as a playmate, but as a dormant threat. With each heavy rain, I counted the steps between the riverbank and our house. And worse, I began to notice how Dad looked differently at each of us, as if making silent calculations that I couldn't decipher. The winter of 1967 was especially wet. I was already 15, George 17, and Linda 11. The rain started in May and gave no respite. The river kept rising, slowly at first, then with frightening speed. By June, water had already swallowed the lower parts of the town. Families in risk areas were warned to stay alert. Our house had never been hit before, but this time was different. The force of the water was greater, the amount of rain unprecedented. On a Friday night, as we dined in silence, we heard loud knocks at the door. It was Lieutenant Custodian from Civil Defense, soaked to the bone. "Arnold, you need to leave now," he said, without beating around the bush. "The river will overflow in the next few hours, and your house is in its path." I saw my father's face turn pale. He looked at Mom, then at us, and then nodded. "How much time do we have?" "An hour, at most. Take only the essentials. A truck will come by to pick you up." After the lieutenant left, it was a rush. Mom packing clothes, medicine for Linda, documents, George and Dad trying to protect the furniture, putting them in the attic. I ran to my room and stored my music box, some dolls, and school books in a bag. That's when I heard the first rumble. Water was already hitting against the house's foundations, making the floorboards groan. Mom shouted for Dad, who was in the yard checking the water level. "Arnold! Arnold! It's rising too fast!" He came in running, wet up to his knees. His face was transformed by fear. "The truck won't get here in time," he said, his voice trembling. "The bridge is already covered. We need to go to the roof. Now!" At that moment, I felt something cold run down my spine. It wasn't just the water that scared me. It was my father's look. A look I had never seen before, a mixture of terror and determination that made me tremble inside. George grabbed the ladder and positioned it for us to climb to the attic, and from there, through a small opening, to the roof. Dad picked up Linda in his arms. She was trembling, her face as pale as wax, her lips purple from cold and fear. Mom gathered some blankets and Linda's medicine bag. "You first, Dorothy," Dad ordered. Mom hesitated, but climbed up, receiving Linda next. "Now you, George." My brother looked at me, then at Dad. "Olivia first," he said, in a rare moment of defiance. Dad gave me a strange look, as if seeing me for real for the first time. "Go, girl," he said, finally. I had one foot on the first rung of the ladder when we heard another rumble, much stronger this time. The back wall of the house gave way, and a wave of icy water invaded the living room, knocking down furniture, dragging everything in its path. I was thrown against the wall, the water already at my waist. "Dad!" I screamed in panic. He and George fought against the current to reach me. I saw the terror in their eyes when the water continued to rise, now almost at my chest. George managed to reach me first, pulling me forcefully to the ladder. "Climb! Climb!" he shouted as he pushed me up. I managed to reach the attic, soaked and trembling. Mom pulled me close to her and Linda, who was crying silently. George came right after, followed by Dad, who closed the trapdoor behind him. "The water is rising very fast," he said, breathless. "We have to go to the roof." Through the small attic window, Dad broke some tiles, creating an opening. One by one, we came out onto the roof. The scene we saw was a nightmare. The entire town seemed to be underwater. Houses, trees, cars, all partially submerged. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, and in the distance we heard screams from other families trapped like us. We clung to the slippery tiles, grouped at the highest point of the roof. Mom hugged Linda, trying to keep her warm with a soaked blanket. I pressed against George, who put his arm around me. Dad stayed a bit apart, his eyes fixed in the distance, looking for any sign of rescue. That's when we saw a light cutting through the darkness. A small boat approached, struggling against the current. Two figures materialized. It was Lieutenant Custodian and another man I didn't recognize. "How many are you?" shouted the lieutenant when the boat got close enough. "5, Dad answered. "My wife, 3 children, and myself." The lieutenant exchanged a concerned look with his companion. "The boat can only hold 1 more adult or 2 small children," he said. "The currents are too strong. We'll take the most vulnerable first and come back for the others." A heavy silence fell over us. I looked at the boat. It was indeed small, already overloaded with the 2 men and their rescue equipment. The water continued to rise, already licking the lower edges of the roof. "Take my youngest daughter," Dad said finally. "She's sick. She won't last long in this cold." The lieutenant nodded and positioned the boat as close as possible to the roof. "Hand over the girl," he said, extending his arms. Mom kissed Linda's forehead, tears mixing with rain on her face. "Be strong, my love," she whispered, before handing her to Dad. It was at this moment that something changed in my father's eyes. He held Linda with one arm and with the other grabbed my wrist tightly. "Wait," he said to the lieutenant. "Take both of them, Linda and my wife." "Can't do it, sir," replied the lieutenant. "I already explained. It's too dangerous." Dad looked at Mom, then at me, and then at George. I saw something pass between father and son, a silent communication that sent chills down to my soul. "Then take the youngest," Dad said finally. "We'll return for the others." He handed Linda to the lieutenant, who carefully placed her in the boat. My little sister looked like a rag doll, soaked and trembling, her eyes huge with fear. "We'll come back as fast as possible," assured the lieutenant as the boat began to move away. "Dad!" Linda screamed, extending her arms in our direction. "Mom!" "Everything will be all right, daughter," Mom shouted back. "We'll be with you soon, soon." We watched the boat struggle against the current until it became just a point of light in the darkness. When it disappeared completely, Mom turned to Dad. "Why didn't you send Olivia too?" she asked. "Both would fit." Dad didn't answer. He was looking at the water, which kept rising. His silence chilled me more than the rain falling on us. "Arnold?" Mom insisted. "What is it?" He finally faced her, and what I saw in his eyes made me understand everything. It wasn't a question of space in the boat. It was a choice. He had chosen who to save first. "If the boat doesn't come back in time," he began to say, but was interrupted by a deafening noise. The roof of the neighboring house completely collapsed, swallowed by the water. The current got even stronger, hitting against our house, making it shake entirely. A part of our own roof gave way, forcing us to crowd even more in the small space that remained. "We'll have to swim!" shouted George. "The house won't hold." "Swim where?" replied Dad. "The current will take us." "Better than sinking with the house," George shot back. That's when we saw another light approaching. It wasn't the same boat as before. This one was larger, more stable. "Thank God," Mom sighed. The boat approached with difficulty. There were 3 men in it, all from civil defense. "Hurry!" shouted one of them. "This whole area will be flooded in the next few minutes." "You go first, Dorothy," Dad said, helping Mom down to the boat. She hesitated. "Come, Olivia," she called me, extending her hand. I started to move towards her, but Dad held my arm. "George first," he said. "He can help pull the others." My brother looked at me, confused. "Go, bro," I said, trying to smile. "Then it's my turn." George descended agilely into the boat and extended his arms to me. I moved to the edge of the roof, ready to go down, when another rumble shook the house. Part of the roof under my feet collapsed, making me slip. Dad grabbed me by the waist, preventing me from falling into the turbulent water. "Quickly!" shouted one of the men in the boat. "We don't have much time." Dad held me firmly, but instead of helping me down to the boat, he pulled me back to the roof. "What are you doing?" asked Mom, horrified. Dad didn't answer. The water was rising rapidly. The house trembled, about to collapse. "We have to go now," shouted the man in the boat, "or no one will be saved." I saw my father's face transformed by something I had never seen before, a mixture of desperation and resolution. "Your sister needs me more," he shouted, looking directly at me. And then, in a movement that froze my heart, he let me go. I felt my body being dragged by the icy water, the world spinning around me. I heard screams, Mom, George, the men in the boat, but they were quickly swallowed by the roar of the current. I fought to keep my head above water, desperately gulping air when I managed to emerge. "Dad!" I screamed one last time before being carried away. The last image I saw was the boat moving away, carrying my family and my father, standing on what remained of the roof, looking in the direction I was being dragged. There was no guilt in his look, just a terrible certainty. He had made his choice. The water swallowed me like a hungry mouth. I felt myself ripped from the world I knew, my body thrown and turned by the furious current. I don't know how long I fought, my lungs burning, my arms and legs hitting against invisible objects in the liquid darkness. Each time I managed to emerge, I desperately pulled in air before being pulled back into the abyss. "I'm going to die," I thought, with frightening clarity. My father left me to die. A sharp pain in my head was the last thing I felt before everything went dark. I woke up to an unknown world. A white ceiling, the strong smell of medicine, the constant beeping of a machine. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was made of lead. A woman in white leaned over me, her tired face opening in a relieved smile. "She's awake, doctor," she called, turning to the door. Then she looked back at me. "Easy, dear. You're at Riverside Hospital. Everything's all right now." Riverside Hospital? That was more than 30 miles from Riverview. The flood had carried me downstream all that way? A man in a lab coat entered the room. Dr. Matthews, according to the badge hanging on his chest. "Welcome back," he said, checking my pupils with a small flashlight. "You gave us quite a scare. 3 days unconscious." 3 days. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. "My family," I finally managed to mutter. The doctor and nurse exchanged a look that made my blood freeze. "We'll take care of that later," he said gently. "Now you need to rest." But I couldn't rest, not when my head was full of fragmented images, the roof, the boat, my father's face as he deliberately let me go. "Your sister needs me more." "Need to?" "No," I insisted, trying to sit up. Dr. Matthews sighed. "You were found clinging to a tree trunk by fishermen a few miles from here," he explained. "You had severe hypothermia and head trauma. You had no identification on you." "My name is Olivia," I said. "Olivia Wright, from Riverview." Again, that look between them. "Dear," said the nurse, holding my hand. "The flood hit Riverview very hard. Many people didn't survive." The world seemed to slow down around me. "My mother," I whispered. "Dorothy Wright, my brother George, my sister Linda, my father Arnold." "We'll check the survivors list," promised the doctor. "Now rest." The days that followed were a blur of physical and emotional pain, fever, nightmares, moments of confusion. Sometimes I woke up screaming, feeling the water swallowing me again. Other times, I clearly saw my father's face as he chose to let me go. A week later, Dr. Matthews entered my room with a solemn expression. He sat on the edge of the bed and held my hands. "Olivia," he began, hesitantly, "we checked all the lists. We found records of your family." My heart raced. "Are they okay? Where are they?" He squeezed my hands a little more. Your mother and your brother managed to be rescued that night, he said slowly. Your sister Linda was also saved in the first boat. And my father? I asked, although I already knew the answer by his look. Your father couldn't get off the roof in time. The house completely collapsed a few minutes after the boat left. I felt a wave of contradictory emotions: sadness, anger, guilt. He had let me go to die, but ended up being him who didn't survive. Where are they now? My mother, George, Linda? The doctor hesitated. They're in a temporary shelter in Cincinnati. But, Olivia, there's something you need to know. I waited, heart tight. They think you died in the flood. Your body wasn't found, so you were declared missing, presumably dead. The room seemed to spin around me. But I'm alive. You can tell them, can't you? Dr. Matthews looked at the floor, then back at me. We can, of course, but there are complications. What complications? When you were brought here, we heard you talking during the fever, about your father deliberately letting you go, about him choosing your sister over you. I felt my face burn with shame and anger. And you think I'm making it up? I asked, my voice trembling. No, I don't think so, he replied quickly. But your father is now seen as a hero in Riverview. The story circulating is that he stayed behind to ensure that you, your mother, and your siblings could be saved, but you were dragged away by the current before he could reach you. He died trying to save you. That's how everyone, including your family, believes it happened. I remained silent, absorbing the impact of those words. My father, the man who chose to sacrifice me, was being celebrated as a martyr, a hero. Your mother and siblings are devastated, Olivia, continued the doctor. They lost their husband, father, and daughter, sister, all in the same night. But at least they have the comfort of believing he died trying to save the family. So you're suggesting I don't tell the truth? That I don't tell them I'm alive? Dr. Matthews shook his head. I'm not suggesting anything. I just want you to understand the whole situation before we decide how to proceed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of the flood mixed with thoughts about my family. My mother, always so protective, believing she had lost a daughter. George, who had tried to help me on the roof. Linda, fragile and innocent, not knowing that our father had chosen her over my life. And my father, a hero in everyone's eyes. A man who had made a terrible choice that night, a choice that revealed how much I meant to him. Less than Linda, less than George, dispensable. The next morning, a social worker came to visit me. Celia was her name, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a thick folder under her arm. Dr. Matthews told me about your situation, she said, sitting next to my bed. I'm here to help decide the next steps. I want to see my family, I stated, determined. Celia nodded. I understand. But first, I need to tell you a few more things. She opened the folder and took out some photos. They were newspaper clippings. One of them showed a photo of my father, along with a headline, Flood Hero Sacrifices His Own Life to Save Family. Your father is being celebrated throughout the region, explained Celia. The story has moved many people. Several survivors say they saw him helping to put you all in the boat, shouting for them to leave without him because the house was about to collapse. I looked at the photo, at my father's familiar face, feeling a dull anger grow inside me. That's a lie, I whispered. It's what you remember, said Celia gently, and maybe it's the truth. But traumas like the one you suffered can affect memory, and in extreme danger situations, perceptions can be distorted. Are you saying I imagined it all? That my father didn't deliberately let me go? She shrugged. I'm saying that the truth is sometimes complicated, and that you have a difficult choice to make. She showed me another clipping. It was a photo of my mother and siblings in a shelter, the three together, their faces marked by suffering. Your family is going through a terrible moment, Celia continued. They lost everything in the flood, the house, belongings, father, you. They're receiving psychological support to deal with the trauma. Your younger sister has been having frequent crises, according to reports. Her health, which was already fragile, has worsened considerably. I felt hot tears running down my face. What are you trying to tell me? Celia sighed. I'm trying to show you the complete picture so you can make an informed decision. If you return now, telling a different version of what happened that night, it could have a devastating impact on your family's recovery, especially for your sister. So I should pretend I'm dead to protect the memory of the man who tried to kill me? She shook her head. No, of course not. But perhaps you should consider the possibility of a gradual reintegration, without going into details about that night, at least until everyone is emotionally more stable. I remained silent, thinking about all the implications. Part of me wanted to run into my mother's arms, hug my siblings, tell them I was alive, that I had survived. Another part wondered if I would be able to look at Linda without resentment, knowing that my father had chosen her over me. And there was another question, one I barely dared admit to myself. What if my family already knew the truth? What if Mom and George had seen Dad let me go, but chose to believe the hero version because it was easier, more comfortable? I need time, I finally said. Celia nodded, understanding. There's another option I'd like to present, she said, hesitantly. There's a couple in Riverside, about 20 miles from here. They lost their only daughter in the flood, a girl your age. They're devastated. When they heard about you, a teenager without identification, found in the river, they came to the hospital hoping for a miracle. They think I'm their daughter? I asked, incredulous. No, not anymore. But they offered to take you in temporarily until you're fully recovered and can decide what to do. They can provide a stable home, medical care, continued education. The proposal was tempting. A new beginning, away from the shadows of the past, away from my father's terrible choice, away from the possible resentment I would feel seeing Linda. A time to heal not just my body, but my soul. Can I meet them? I asked. The next day I met Eleanor and Sylvester Ross. They were a middle-aged couple, she a teacher, he a pharmacist. Their eyes still carried the weight of recent loss, but there was also genuine kindness in them. We don't want to replace your family, Olivia, said Eleanor, holding my hands. We just want to help. For as long as you need, for as long as you want. I looked at these strangers who were willing to take me in without asking questions, without expecting explanations, just offering a safe place where I could recover. I accept, I said, feeling as if I was leaving a part of me behind. But with one condition. Which one? Asked Sylvester. I don't want to use my real name, not yet. They exchanged a look, then nodded. What do you want to be called then? Asked Eleanor. I thought for a moment. I needed a name that had no connection to my past, no link to the girl who was thrown into the river by her own father. Helen, I answered, remembering a character from a book I had read in school. Helen Smith. That's how I began my new life. A life built upon a lie, upon a borrowed identity. The Rosses treated me like a daughter from day one. They enrolled me in the local school, took me to doctors to treat the physical and emotional sequelae of the trauma, never pressed when I woke up screaming in the middle of the night. But the truth is, I wasn't well. I couldn't remember many things from my life before the flood. The head trauma had affected my memory. Sometimes, flashes would appear. My mother's face embroidering, George teaching me to fish, the sound of Linda's laugh. And always that final moment on the roof, my father's voice echoing, "Your sister needs me more." I also suffered from an irrational terror of water. I couldn't take baths, only quick showers that left me anxious. Lakes, rivers, even pools caused me panic attacks. The sound of heavy rain made me tremble. Eleanor, who was a psychology teacher, tried to help me with breathing techniques, relaxation exercises, patient conversations on sleepless nights. Sylvester prepared calming teas with herbs from his pharmacy, taught me about medicinal plants as a distraction. And so the months passed. One day, at breakfast, Eleanor placed a newspaper on the table. "I thought you should see this," she said gently. It was a small note in the local news section. "Family of flood victim returns to Riverview." There was a photo of my mother, thinner and aged than I remembered, along with George and Linda, in front of a house I didn't recognize. "They rebuilt their lives," commented Sylvester, "just as you're doing." Something inside me twisted with pain and relief at the same time. They were moving on, believing I was dead, preserving my father's heroic memory. And I was here, living a borrowed life, carrying alone the weight of the truth. "When are you going to tell them?" asked Eleanor carefully. "I don't know if I will," I answered honestly. "I don't know if I can." She nodded, understanding. "Whatever your decision, we'll be by your side." And so my double life continued. On the outside, I was Helen Smith, the young woman who lived with the Rosses, who studied diligently, who helped at the pharmacy after school. Inside, I remained Olivia Wright, the girl her father chose to sacrifice, the sister who was considered less important, the daughter declared dead. As months turned into years, the memory of the flood became more distant, though never less painful. I finished high school, started college in Cincinnati. I chose psychology, inspired by Eleanor. It was at the university that I met Thomas, an engineering student with gentle eyes and infinite patience. Our relationship grew slowly, built upon deep conversations and mutual respect. When he asked me to be his girlfriend, I hesitated. "There are things about me you don't know," I confessed. "Things that might change how you feel about me." "Nothing could change that," he assured. But I knew it wasn't true. How would he react if he knew I was living a lie? That I wasn't who I claimed to be? That I had abandoned my real family, letting them believe I was dead? And then, at the end of my second year of college, something happened that changed everything. A classmate brought a newspaper to class, pointing to a front-page report. "Look at this," she said, excited. "They're going to make a documentary about the Great Flood of '67. They're interviewing survivors." I took the newspaper with trembling hands. The article talked about the project, mentioning some of the stories that would be told. And there it was, in a small paragraph, the mention of my family. Among the interviewees is the Wright family, who lost Father Arnold and middle daughter Olivia in the tragedy. Arnold Wright became a symbol of heroism during the flood, sacrificing his own life to ensure the survival of his wife and two of his children. I felt the blood drain from my face. The symbol of heroism. The lie had solidified, becoming part of the town's official history. "Are you okay?" asked my classmate, noticing my paleness. Just remembered something," I muttered, returning the newspaper. That night, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts spun in my head like the turbulent water of the river. What would happen if I appeared now, almost a decade later, debunking the hero story? How would my mother react to knowing I had been alive all this time, living with another family, using another name? How would Linda deal with the revelation that our father had chosen her over me? How would George look at me, knowing I let them believe I was dead? And there was another question, even more disturbing. After so long living as Helen, how much of Olivia remained in me? The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to see my family one last time, even from afar, before deciding whether to reveal the truth. I needed to know how they really were, not just through newspaper clippings or third-party accounts. I asked for a few days off from university and took a bus to Riverview. The town had completely recovered from the flood. New houses, paved streets, a sense of normality that contrasted with the chaotic memories I kept. I found my family's address after a few discreet questions. It was a simple house, painted yellow, with a small garden in front. I watched from afar, my heart beating erratically. And then the door opened, and she came out, my mother, Dorothy. Older, her hair now with gray streaks, but still with that characteristic way of walking, slightly tilted to the right. She watered some plants, chatted briefly with a neighbor, and went back inside. Minutes later, it was George who appeared. My brother was now a grown man, with broad shoulders and a more defined face, but still recognizable. He left in a hurry, probably going to work. I waited more, hidden behind a tree across the street, feeling like an intruder, a voyeur of the life that could have been mine. Finally, in the late afternoon, I saw Linda. My younger sister was now a young woman, but something in her appearance deeply disturbed me. She seemed broken. She walked slowly, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the ground. At her side, a man I didn't recognize guided her with a firm hand on her arm. I followed them at a safe distance. They entered a pharmacy where the man, who I presumed was her husband, spoke briefly with the pharmacist while Linda waited, motionless, like a statue. When they left, I managed to hear a fragment of the conversation. "The same medicines as always," the man was saying. "The doctor said she can't go without them." They returned home, and I continued my vigil until nightfall. When the lights came on in the yellow house, I approached stealthily, stopping under a side window. Muffled voices came from inside, an argument. "She needs these medicines, Mom," it was George's voice. "You know how she gets without them." "I know, son," my mother replied, her voice tired. "But they're so expensive, and Theodore sometimes forgets to give them to her on time." "That guy is no good," George growled. "He only married her because of the pension." "Lower your voice," warned my mother. "Linda might hear." "She's too doped up to hear anything," George retorted, bitter. "As always." I moved away from the window, stomach churning. What had happened to my little sister? What had happened to my family in the years I had been absent? The next day, I returned to town to continue my silent investigation. At a newspaper stand, I found an old copy of the local newspaper that talked about the 5th anniversary of the flood. There was a special article on heroes and victims, with a big highlight for my father. I bought the newspaper and read it on a park bench, each word like a knife turning in the open wound of my soul. The story had been completely distorted. According to the article, my father had heroically held the roof of the house so the rest of the family could board the rescue boat. I, described as the middle daughter, a promising young woman of 15, had been dragged away by the current while trying to help a neighbor. It was surreal to read about my own death, about a heroism that never existed, about a version of events that had no relation to the truth. But the most painful part came at the end of the article. The tragedy left deep marks on the Wright family. The youngest daughter, Linda, never fully recovered from the trauma of losing her father and sister on the same night. She suffers from severe depression and other psychological disorders requiring constant care. "She feels a lot of guilt," explains her mother, Dorothy. "She believes that, having been the first to be saved, somehow she caused the death of her father and sister." Guilt. Linda felt guilt for something that wasn't her fault, but our father's. The man who had made a terrible choice that night and was now celebrated as a hero. It was at this moment that I realized the magnitude of what was at stake. If I returned now, revealing the truth, I wouldn't just be demystifying my father's heroic image. I would potentially be destroying my sister, who already lived carrying a burden too heavy for her fragile shoulders. I spent 2 more days observing my family from afar, gathering fragments of their lives through caught conversations, observed expressions, followed routines. What I saw broke my heart. My mother, aged before her time, working 2 jobs to support the house. George, bitter and overloaded with responsibilities that shouldn't be his. And Linda, my poor little sister, living in a prison of medications and guilt, married to a man who clearly didn't love her. This was the family my father had saved. This was the result of his choice on that fateful night. On the morning of my last day in Riverview, I made my decision. I would not reveal the truth, at least not yet. Not because I wanted to protect my father's memory, but because I couldn't be responsible for more suffering for my family. I returned to Cincinnati, to my life as Helen, carrying the weight of this secret. But something had changed inside me. A resolution had formed. A plan was beginning to take shape. If I couldn't tell the truth, at least I could try to help my family from afar. I started sending money anonymously to my mother, small amounts I gathered working as a waitress on weekends. I researched Linda's condition, trying to better understand available treatments. And most importantly, I started gathering evidence. Newspaper clippings from the time of the flood, testimonies from survivors, medical records of my rescue. One day, perhaps, when Linda was stronger, when the weight of the lie became unbearable, I would have how to prove who I really was and what really happened on that terrible night. Your sister needs me more. My father's words continued to haunt me, now with an even more sinister meaning. He had chosen Linda that night, condemning me to death. But his choice had, in a way, condemned us all. The months turned into years as I lived my double life. On the surface, I was Helen Smith, psychology student, Thomas's girlfriend, adoptive daughter of the Rosses. Deep down, I remained Olivia Wright, the girl the river couldn't take, who carried the weight of a truth that no one else knew. My graduation from college was a bittersweet moment. Eleanor and Sylvester were in the audience, proud, applauding when I received my diploma. Thomas waited for me with flowers. It was a perfect scene of happiness, but while I smiled for the photos, a part of me wondered how it would be if my real mother were there, if George and Linda could see me in that moment of achievement. My secret visit to Riverview years before had planted a restless seed in my heart. Now graduated, I began working in a psychology clinic in Cincinnati, specializing in trauma and grief, a choice that was no coincidence. Each patient I saw with stories of loss or abandonment was a fragmented mirror of my own experience. I continued sending money anonymously to my family, never large amounts that could raise suspicions, just enough to ease a bit of the financial burden weighing on my mother. And I continued collecting evidence, keeping clippings, documents, anything that could one day corroborate my story. It was in 1978, 11 years after the flood, that the last straw finally broke. I was flipping through the newspaper when I saw a small note. Riverview Community prepares memorial honoring victims of the Great Flood of 1967. Monument will include statue of Arnold Wright, considered local hero for saving his family at the cost of his own life. A statue. They were going to erect a statue for the man who had deliberately left me to die. Something inside me, something that had remained dormant for a long time, awakened with fury. I showed the newspaper to Thomas, who already knew parts of my true story. Not everything. I never told him about the moment my father let me go. But he knew I wasn't Helen Smith, knew I had survived a flood, knew my family believed I was dead. "What are you going to do?" he asked, holding my hand. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I can't let this happen. I can't let them celebrate a lie in stone and bronze." That night I couldn't sleep. Images of the past mixed with nightmares of the present. I saw my father's face transformed into a statue, impassive, while the water swallowed me. I saw Linda, pale and fragile, placing flowers at the feet of the monument of the man who had chosen between his daughters. In the early hours, I got up and began to write a letter, not to my family, but to the mayor of Riverview. A letter I never sent, where I poured all the truth, all the anger, all the pain contained for more than a decade. When the sun rose, there were pages and pages scattered on the floor, stained with tears. Thomas found me like this, sitting among the papers, exhausted. "You need to go back there," he said simply. "Not to expose anything, not to confront anyone, just to see with your own eyes, to be sure of what you want to do." He was right. I needed to return to Riverview, not as a secret observer this time, but to feel again the place where everything began, before deciding how it would end. A week later, I requested leave from work and traveled to my hometown. Little Riverview had changed a lot since my last clandestine visit. New buildings, paved streets, a sense of prosperity that didn't exist before. The Ohio River remained there, gentle on the surface, treacherous in the depths, just like the memories it carried. I stayed in a simple boarding house and spent the first days just walking around town, reabsorbing its smells, its sounds, feeling the weight of its history, of my history, on every corner. On the third day, I took courage and went to the municipal cemetery. It wasn't difficult to find, a large, well-kept tombstone with Arnold Wright's name and below, my own name, Olivia Wright. Father and daughter, taken by the same flood, united in eternity. I stood there, before that piece of stone that proclaimed my death, feeling a mixture of emotions so intense I could barely breathe. Anger, sadness, confusion, a strange sense of displacement, as if I were visiting my own grave, as if the real Olivia had indeed died that night, leaving only this simulacrum, this Helen, in her place. Did you know them? The voice behind me made me freeze. I turned slowly and saw a middle-aged man with graying hair and a vaguely familiar face. I was just looking, I managed to mutter. The man smiled sadly. Arnold was my friend. We worked together at the sawmill. A tragedy what happened to him and his daughter. Mr. Benjamin. It was him, older, but still recognizable. The man who had warned my father about the river's danger so many years ago. Were you there? The night of the flood? I asked, trying to control the tremor in my voice. He nodded, his gaze lost in memories. Not on the same roof, but nearby. I saw when the boat came. I heard the screams. He paused, as if deciding whether to continue. Many people don't know, but I saw when the girl was dragged away. I'm sure Arnold tried to hold her, but the current was too strong. My heart raced. Here was someone who had witnessed, someone who could corroborate my version of the facts. Are you sure? I insisted. Did you see exactly how it happened? He looked at me with curiosity. Why the interest, miss? You don't seem to be from here. Just historical curiosity, I answered, trying to sound casual. I'm doing research on natural disasters. Mr. Benjamin seemed to accept the explanation. Well, as I said, I saw when she was dragged away. The water was rising fast, the roof collapsing. Arnold tried to hold her, shouted for help, but... He shook his head. It's a shame. He was a good man, loved that family more than anything. Each word was like a knife twisted in my chest. Either my memory was completely wrong, or Mr. Benjamin hadn't seen what really happened, or he was perpetuating the lie that had become the official truth. And his family? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. How did they handle the loss? Mr. Benjamin's face darkened. Not very well. His wife, Dorothy, was never the same. The older son became bitter, distant, and the youngest. He hesitated. Well, little Linda suffered too much. Has problems, you know? Here. He pointed to his own head. Never recovered from the trauma. Blames herself for being the only one saved in the first boat. Blames herself? I repeated, feeling a lump in my throat. Yes. They say she has this fixed idea that if she had stayed, her father and sister would have been saved, that she was selfish for going first. He sighed deeply. One tragedy on top of another. She even tried, well, to hurt herself, more than once. The world seemed to darken around me. Linda had tried to kill herself. My little sister, so fragile, carrying a guilt that wasn't hers. A guilt that belonged to our father, and perhaps also to me, for having kept the truth hidden for so long. Thank you for your time, I muttered, moving away quickly before tears betrayed me. I returned to the boarding house in a state of shock. I spent the night awake, reliving every detail of that conversation, every revelation about Linda's state, every implication of what I had discovered. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to see Linda one last time before deciding whether to reveal the truth. Not from afar, like last time, but up close, looking into her eyes, trying to understand what my revelation would do to her. I discovered she attended a small church on Wednesday afternoons. I went there and sat on a bench in the back, waiting. When she entered, accompanied by her husband Theodore, I almost didn't recognize her. She was thinner than ever, her face marked by a deep sadness, her movements hesitant, as if she feared the very air around her. Theodore left her at the church and left, saying he would return in an hour. As soon as he departed, I carefully approached, sitting on the same bench as her, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's a beautiful place to pray, isn't it?" I commented softly. Linda looked at me, surprised to be approached by a stranger. Her eyes, the same brown eyes I remembered from childhood, were opaque, lifeless. "Yes," she answered, her voice almost a whisper. "I come here every Wednesday." "I like churches too," I continued, looking for a way to maintain the conversation. "There's something comforting about them." She nodded vaguely, her gaze returning to the altar. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked after a moment. "No. I'm passing through. I'm a psychologist. I work with people who have gone through traumas. I don't know why I mentioned my profession. Perhaps I hoped it would make her open up. Perhaps it was just the need to establish some kind of real connection with her." "Traumas," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Like losses?" "Yes, among other things." She remained silent for so long that I thought the conversation had ended. But then, without looking at me, she spoke. "I lost my father and my sister in a flood, a long time ago." My heart tightened. "I'm sorry," I managed to say. "Everyone says that," she replied, a bitter note in her soft voice. "But no one understands." "What does no one understand?" I asked gently. She finally turned to me, her eyes suddenly animated by an emotion I couldn't identify. "That it was my fault, that they died because of me." "Why do you think that?" "Because I was the first to be saved. The boat came, and my father insisted I go first. He could have sent my sister Olivia, or my mother, or my brother George, but he chose me. And then the roof collapsed. The water took my sister, my father died trying to save her." Tears began to stream down her pale face. "If he hadn't chosen me, if I had stayed, maybe everyone would have been saved." Each word was a dagger in my chest. The truth I knew was so different, so terribly different. My father hadn't died trying to save me. He had let me die so he could save Linda. And now she lived carrying a guilt that should be his. "Linda," I spoke, almost without realizing I had used her name, which I shouldn't know. "It wasn't your fault." She seemed not to notice my slip, lost in her own pain. "Everyone says that. My mother, my brother, the doctors, the pastor, but they don't know. They don't know what it was like to be the weak one, the sick one, the one everyone had to protect." She sobbed. "My father loved me more than anything. He worried so much about me. Always said I needed special care. And because of that love, he died. My sister died. It was as if lightning had struck my mind. Suddenly, everything made a terrible sense. My father's preference for Linda, the obsession with protecting her, keeping her safe. Your sister needs me more. It wasn't just a choice of that desperate moment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of favoritism, of a concern that bordered on obsession. "And how is your life now?" I asked, struggling to maintain composure. She shrugged, a gesture of defeat. "I live with the medicines, with the consultations, with the nightmares, with Theodore, who married me out of pity or for my father's pension money." She smiled, an empty smile, without joy. "Mom thinks I don't know, but I do. He doesn't even hide it anymore." "Theodore, does he treat you well?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know. "He doesn't hit me, if that's what you want to know," she answered finally. "Just controls me. The medicines, where I can go, who I can talk to. Says it's for my own good, that I can't trust myself. The same words, the same kind of control. As my father had done with her, Theodore now did. A cycle of abuse disguised as protection. And do you believe that? That you can't trust yourself? She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Sometimes, she confessed. Other times, I think that maybe everything is a big lie. That maybe my father wasn't the hero everyone says. That maybe... She stopped, as if frightened by her own thoughts. Maybe? I encouraged. Nothing, she retreated. Just crazy thoughts. The doctor says it's part of my condition, questioning reality. At that moment, I almost told her everything. Almost said, "It's me, Olivia, your sister. I'm alive. And it wasn't your fault. It never was." But then the church door opened, and Theodore entered. "Linda," he called, authoritarian. "Time to go." She got up immediately, like an obedient child. "It was good talking to you," she said to me, her voice returning to the submissive tone. "Likewise," I replied, watching as Theodore led her away by the arm, more like a jailer than a husband. I remained in the empty church for a long time after they left, trying to process everything I had discovered, everything that brief conversation had revealed. Linda wasn't just sick, she was trapped. Trapped in a lie, trapped in a guilt that wasn't hers, trapped in a marriage that was just another form of control. And I, with my years of silence, had been complicit in all of this. When I finally left the church, the sun was already setting. I walked aimlessly through the streets of Riverview, each step echoing the battle that raged within me. Revealing the truth now could destroy Linda, whose fragile mind clung to the image of the hero father. But continuing in silence meant condemning her to live forever in that prison of guilt and control. I ended up stopping at the banks of the Ohio River, the same river that had tried to swallow me, that had changed the course of my life forever. Its waters ran tranquil now, but I knew what was hidden beneath that apparent calm. It was there, looking at the river that almost took my life, that I made my decision. I couldn't simply appear and say, "Hello, I'm Olivia, I'm alive." That would be a brutal shock, potentially devastating for Linda and my mother. But I also couldn't continue living as Helen, knowing what I now knew. I needed a plan. A careful, gradual plan that would allow the truth to emerge in a controlled way, that would offer the necessary support for when the bubble of lies finally burst. And most importantly, I needed to get Linda out of that situation. I needed to free her. From the guilt, from the lie, from Theodore. I returned to Cincinnati with renewed determination. For the first time in many years, I felt I was truly alive, that I was about to recover not just my identity, but my purpose. "I'm going to reveal who I am," I told Thomas on the night of my return. "But I need to do it the right way." He hugged me tightly, understanding without me needing to explain further. In the months that followed, I meticulously elaborated my plan. First, I needed to establish a presence in Riverview without revealing my identity. I rented a small office in town, presenting myself as Dr. Helen Smith, psychologist specializing in trauma and grief. I began seeing some local patients, building a reputation for competence and empathy. At the same time, I sought more information about Linda's situation. I discovered her marriage to Theodore was deteriorating, that the medicines she took, prescribed by a doctor who was a close friend of her husband's, kept her in an almost catatonic state, that my mother and George suspected abuse but couldn't intervene effectively. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon in April 1979. I was in my office when the door abruptly opened and George entered, carrying Linda in his arms. She was unconscious, her face pale as wax. "I need help," he said, breathless. "My sister. An overdose of medication. I can't take her to the hospital. Her husband works there. Please." My brother didn't recognize me, of course. For him, I was just the new psychologist in town, someone who might be able to help without asking questions. Put her on the couch, I instructed, trying to maintain professional calm while my heart beat erratically. I examined Linda quickly. Her vital signs were weak, but stable. From the amount and type of medications George said she took, I assessed she wasn't in immediate danger of death, but needed care. Was it intentional? I asked, fearing the answer. George nodded, his eyes full of tears. I found this next to her, he said, handing me a crumpled piece of paper. It was a note, written in a trembling hand. I can't take it anymore. I want to be with Dad and Olivia. Forgive me. My world seemed to stop. Linda had tried to kill herself to join me, to join someone who was alive, who was right there, in front of her brother, pretending to be someone else. I need to take her to a safe place, I decided, my voice firm despite the inner turmoil. A place where her husband can't find her. Where to? Asked George, desperate. I have a house in Riverside, I replied, referring to the Ross's house, who still considered me their daughter. She'll be safe there, and you're coming with me. George hesitated only a moment before agreeing. While he carried Linda to my car, I called Thomas, quickly explaining the situation. He promised to meet us in Riverside. The journey was tense, with Linda occasionally waking only to fall back asleep. George, in the back seat with her head in his lap, seemed aged, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. How did you know about my office? I asked, trying to maintain a normal conversation. My mother heard about you, said you were good, that you had helped her neighbor. He paused. Actually, I was planning to bring Linda for a consultation. For years, we've been trying to get her out of that situation with Theodore, but she never accepts help. She's convinced she deserves that life of suffering, that it's her penance. Penance for what? For my father's death, my sister's. He sighed deeply. A tragedy that never ends. We arrived at the Ross's house at nightfall. Eleanor and Sylvester, surprisingly, didn't ask questions when we arrived with an unconscious woman and a desperate man. Years of living with me had taught them to accept the unexpected. We accommodated Linda in a room, and Eleanor, who had experience as a nurse before becoming a teacher, helped monitor her during the night. Thomas arrived hours later, bringing a doctor friend who examined Linda and confirmed she was out of danger. The next morning, Linda woke up. She was confused, disoriented, but conscious. When her eyes met George's, she began to cry. "Why didn't you let me go, bro?" she sobbed. "Why didn't you let me go with them?" George hugged her, crying too. "Because I love you too much to lose you," he answered simply. I left them alone and went to the kitchen, where Eleanor was preparing strong coffee. Thomas and Sylvester were talking in low voices on the porch. "It's time, isn't it?" asked Eleanor, perceptive as always. "Time to tell the truth." I nodded, unable to speak. "It's going to be hard," she continued gently. "But you're ready. And they need to know." That afternoon, when Linda was calmer, I asked to speak with her and George together. Thomas stayed by my side, a comforting presence. "I have something important to tell you," I began, my voice trembling despite all the mental rehearsals I had done. "Something that will be hard to believe, but is the truth." They looked at me, confused. "My name is not Helen Smith," I continued. "That's a name I adopted almost 12 years ago, after the Great Flood of 1967. George frowned, not understanding where I was going. But something in Linda's eyes changed. A flash of recognition, perhaps, or just an awakened curiosity. "My real name," I said, pausing to take a deep breath, "is Olivia Wright." The silence that followed was deafening. George was petrified, his face a mask of shock. Linda put her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide. "That's not possible," George whispered finally. "My sister died in the flood. I saw when she was dragged away by the water." "Yes, you saw," I agreed. "But I survived. I was found by fishermen miles away, with a head trauma. I was in a coma for days. When I woke up, I discovered I had been given up for dead, that Dad had become a hero, And that the truth might do more harm than good. What truth? Asked Linda, her voice almost inaudible. I looked at her eyes so similar to mine, at the face that carried the marks of years of unnecessary suffering. The truth about what happened that night, Linda. About why Dad let me go in the water. About why he said those words I could never forget. What words? Insisted George. Your sister needs me more, I quoted, the words still sharp after so much time. That's what he said, before deliberately letting me go in the water. George stood up abruptly, his face contorted by denial. This is crazy. My father would never do that. He was a hero. He died trying to save— No, bro, interrupted Linda, surprisingly calm. She's telling the truth. George looked at her, astonished. How can you know? Because, she answered, her eyes fixed on mine. I always knew there was something wrong with the official story. I always felt that Dad wasn't the hero everyone said. And— She hesitated. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear those same words. Your sister needs me more. I always thought it was my disturbed mind making things up. But it wasn't, was it? I shook my head, unable to contain the tears. No, Linda. It wasn't your mind. It was the truth trying to emerge. George collapsed back into the chair, anger giving way to confusion. So Dad sacrificed you? To save Linda? Why? Because he always protected her above all, I answered. Because he had this obsession with keeping her safe, with being her savior. When he had to choose, he didn't hesitate. Silence fell over us again, each absorbing the impact of that revelation. Finally, Linda got up and walked over to me. She stood, just looking, as if trying to find in my adult features the sister she had lost. You're really alive, she murmured, extending her hand to touch my face. All these years. You were alive. Yes, I confirmed, holding her hand. And I spent each day wishing I could tell you, wishing I could say it wasn't your fault, it never was, that you don't need to carry this burden. She hugged me then, a desperate hug, almost suffocating in its intensity. We felt George join us, his strong arms embracing us both, and for a moment, we were children again, clinging to each other while the storm raged around us. We have to tell Mom, said George, when we finally separated. She needs to know. We'll tell her, I promised, but we should do it carefully. And there's one more thing we need to resolve first. Theodore, said Linda, the name coming out like a hiss. Yes, I confirmed. I won't let him continue controlling you, keeping you prisoner of a past based on lies. He'll say I'm delusional if I talk about you, she observed, bitter. He'll increase my medications, lock me in the house. Not if he can't find you, said George, a new determination in his voice. Not if you disappear. Where would I go? To Cincinnati, with me and Thomas, I offered, until we resolve everything. Until we're ready to face Theodore, Mom, and the entire town that believes the hero lie. Linda hesitated only a moment before nodding. Yes, she said, a spark of life returning to her eyes. Yes, I want to go. I want to start over. That night marked the true breaking point, not just for me, but for all of us. The bubble of lies had burst, and although the path ahead was uncertain and frightening, for the first time in more than a decade, I felt I was breathing freely. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally emerged from the deep waters where it had been submerged for so long. And with it came the chance for healing, for redemption, for a new beginning. For me, for Linda, for all of us. Transforming 3 lives intertwined by lies wasn't a quick process. With Linda safe in Cincinnati, the next step was telling the truth to our mother, Dorothy. George took on this difficult task, asking her to come to us without revealing why. When Mom entered the apartment and saw me, she fell to her knees. My daughter, my Olivia, she screamed between sobs. She embraced me as if fearing I would disappear again. Hours of tears and explanations followed. We discovered she also had her doubts about that night. She saw when Dad let me go, but trauma and social pressure made her accept the hero version. Together, we elaborated a meticulous plan. First, we needed to legally rescue Linda from Theodore's control. Using my psychology training and the help of medical colleagues, we documented the medication abuse and psychological control he exercised. With testimonies from neighbors and the pharmacy itself, we obtained a court protection order. When Theodore came home and found only a court officer with divorce papers and an investigation for mistreatment, his empire of control instantly collapsed. The hardest part was confronting the public lie about my father. We decided not to directly attack his memory. That would only hurt more people. Instead, we did something more powerful: tell my survival story. George, who had become a respected journalist, published a report revealing that the lost daughter of the flood was alive, with documents and witnesses confirming my identity. Faced with the evidence, the town had no choice but to accept the truth. The statue was never erected. Instead, the memorial honored all flood victims without individual heroes. I legally recovered my identity as Olivia Wright in 1980, but kept Helen as my middle name, a tribute to the Rosses who took me in when I needed it most. Linda, freed from the numbing medications and the guilt that consumed her, flourished. She resumed her studies, graduated in nursing, and met August, a kind teacher whom she married years later. Mom, finally free from the weight of silence, recovered her joy and returned to sewing. In 1990, I made the decision to move to Pine Ridge. I wanted a quiet place, away from Riverview's memories, but still close enough to visit my family regularly. Thomas came with me, bringing his engineering knowledge to help develop the small town. We built our house overlooking the hills, a symbol that we were finally on high ground, away from the waters that almost took me. Today, at 73, I have a quiet life here in Pine Ridge. Our house sits on a hilltop with a wide porch where I can watch the sun rise while having my morning coffee. Thomas and I built a home that is our safe harbor, full of light and with doors always open for family. My greatest joy is making cloth dolls. I started making them 15 years ago, after my first granddaughter, Beth, daughter of my son Timothy, was born. I wanted to give her something special, made with my own hands. I remembered then the dolls my mother made for me in childhood, before the flood changed everything. The first doll was awkward, but Beth loved it. Soon, other children wanted dolls from Grandma Olivia. I realized that each fabric scrap I used told a piece of my story. The blue dress made from Thomas's shirt, the wool hair that Linda taught me to dye with herbs, the little eyes embroidered with the technique my mother passed down to me. When I embroider a red heart on each doll's chest, it's as if I'm stitching together pieces of my own life. Each stitch joins what was broken on that flood night. The children don't know, but in their dolls, they carry the story of a woman who refused to be carried away by the current. My family is my greatest treasure. Timothy, our only son, lives in Minneapolis with his wife and our 2 granddaughters. Linda and August live in Denver, have 3 grown children, and she became a respected nurse specializing in mental health. George remained in Riverview, took over the local newspaper, and transformed pain into purpose, always telling stories that need to be heard. Mom left us 5 years ago, at 92, serene and at peace. Before departing, she told me her only regret was not having the courage to tell the truth sooner. I forgave her long ago. Fear makes prisoners of us all. The Rosses, my adoptive parents, have also passed, but left a legacy of love and acceptance that I carry in every gesture of welcome I offer to others. The pain hasn't completely disappeared. I still have restless nights when the rain is heavy and certain sounds make me jump. But I've learned to navigate the waters of memory without drowning in them. Twice a year, we all gather at my house, at Christmas and on Linda's birthday. The table is full, noisy, with 4 generations together celebrating not just life, but the truth that freed us. Seeing Linda laughing, strong and confident, is my greatest reward. On Sunday afternoons, I sit in this sewing room with my fabric scraps, creating new dolls while the radio plays old country songs. Thomas stops by to bring me coffee and kisses my forehead, as he's done for almost 5 decades. I look at the green hills of Pine Ridge and give thanks, not just for having survived that flood, but for having found the courage to reclaim my true story. The water took many things, but it couldn't take my essence. And today, each doll that leaves my hands carries a little bit of the Olivia that not even the Ohio River could erase. My dear friends who have followed me this far, I want to look into each of your eyes and say, no flood is strong enough to wash away who we truly are. Even when the waters rise, even when those who should protect us let us go in the current, we can survive. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I decided to confront my past at 27, I trembled with fear, but discovered a courage I didn't know existed within me. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. For years I carried the weight of a borrowed identity, but when I finally embraced my truth, it was like breathing for the first time after being underwater for too long. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even on days when I woke up screaming, reliving the moment my father let me go, there was a small flame of hope that refused to die. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have spent my entire life as Helen, hidden and bitter. But I chose to fight for the truth, not for vengeance, but for liberation, for myself and for my sister Linda. If you're going through a similar situation, where truth is drowned in lies that seem to protect someone, know that truth, even painful, is the only path to real healing. Seek help. You don't need to face the current alone. In every state, in every community, there are people and organizations ready to extend a hand when you feel you're being dragged away. Don't be ashamed to reach for that hand. Human dignity is a universal right, and no one deserves to live in lies or fear. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. Today, when I look at Linda playing with her grandchildren, free from the guilt that consumed her, I know every tear was worth it. My dear friends, I want to ask from my heart, if this story touched you, don't let it die here. Click now on the subscribe button and hit the bell. This isn't just to help this grandma here, it's so other people going through similar situations can find strength in our stories of overcoming. Share now this video with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to survive life's floods. Who knows if this story might be the lifeline for someone drowning in silence at this very moment? And leave in the comments the word truth, so I know who stayed until the end of this journey with me. Each comment is like a hug I receive, and God knows how much we need hugs after drifting for so long. Do this now, don't wait another minute. Life is like the river. It doesn't stop flowing while we decide what to do. Always remember, no matter how high the water rises, there's always a path to the surface. I found mine. You can find yours too.